Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we are less than 24 hours, I guess about 24 hours away from things really starting to kick off and get underway for the new season for the Kraken here at the time of recording anyway. And I mean, I'm just so pumped for it. I'm just ready for it to get here already, right? Like we've made it through the 6 preseason games. We've made it through training camp now. I want to see it for realsies.
Exactly. I want to see that too. And it felt a little bit more real today and Coach Bilesma alluded to it a little bit after practice, right? This wasn't really a training camp type practice. This was essentially a morning skate. This was a get things ready for tomorrow kind of skate, because with the 1:30 p.m. start time, they're not going to have a morning skate. There's no time earlier in the morning to do it. So it started to feel more like the game day routine starting today, and it's going to count tomorrow.
And things just everybody felt a little bit more locked in, and they, right? Like it had the feeling of everybody was there for business, and that was, it's kind of the first day that we've felt that and these kind of serious undertones to everything. So it just helped get me ready even more for tomorrow and for the season to finally get underway. I'm excited for today's episode, doing a mailbag episode, being able to answer everybody's questions as we lead into the season here. And of course, I'm excited to talk about Queen Anne Beer Hall, RJ, wonderful sponsor of this podcast. And hey, beautiful thing about an afternoon game, RJ, is after the game, it's basically dinner time. It might be a little early for dinner time for your family anyway.
Yes, eat early.
Yes. But you know what? You could head over after the game, just walk down the street, 3 blocks, go to Queen Anne Beer Hall after the game if you're at CPA, and enjoy their new burger of the month, RJ.
That's right. It's the perfect post-game spot. And you know what? There's a new burger you can try. It is October. So, of course, at the end of September, early October, right? We told you about Oktoberfest and all their Oktoberfest festivities. You can transport yourself all the way to Germany at Queen Anne Beer Hall. But you know what? Now you can transport yourself. You can fly again all the way across the world and go to Vietnam, because they have the banh mi burger. That is the burger of the month. It's got a smash patty with Thai peanut sauce. It's got the Thai peanut sauce, sliced cucumber, jalapeno, daikon radish, shredded carrots, cilantro, and spicy mayo. So I know banh mi, very popular around here, and they've made a banh mi burger. I'd be interested to see how it is with the burger patty too, because I think that would add its own flavor to it.
Yeah, no, that does sound like an interesting one. And again, I mean, it's like a big, good, like real something burger for basically the same price of what you'd pay for like anything in Climate Pledge. So, after the game, go check out Queen Anne Beer Hall, make the walk over and enjoy the festivities. Get to watch the next couple games on the slate for the NHL. You can watch those there while enjoying the banh mi burger. I think it sounds like quite the plan, RJ. Now, I did mention that this is the mailbag episode. We can kind of go into it, or do we want to talk about like the elephant that's sort of in the room first?
I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room first. Yes, we can open the mailbag. We have this nice, wonderful, huge mailbag that is bursting at the seams ready for us. But there's also an elephant right next to it. And that is the captaincy situation for the Seattle Kraken. It's something that I know everybody listening to this has been wondering about, has been waiting on, and we are on the eve of the season opener, and still no captain has been named. The Kraken are the only team in the NHL that has not named a captain yet. And we tried to get a little more clarity on that today. Dan Bilesma wouldn't really tip his hand too much. Now, Dylan, I know you blamed me for asking the question improperly, because I did try to press.
You gave him an out.
Yes, I did give him an out. So our friend Kate Shefty of the Seattle Times asked him about the leadership situation and if it would be the same 4 players in that leadership group with the A's. That would be Adam Larson, Jaden Schwartz, Yanni Gord, and Jordan Eberle. And he said those 4 players would be wearing letters this year. So he gave us that. And I felt the need to press him just a little bit more on that, at least make him say no comment. And so I asked him, do you plan to name a captain before puck drop tomorrow? And he said, well, do I plan to name a captain? And at that moment I realized that's the out that I gave him. And so he's like, no, well, we'll see at puck drop. So we'll all have to see at puck drop. Sorry, everyone. I couldn't be a little more lawyerly and phrase it in a way where there was no way he could get out of it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Look, if they were going to name a captain, I feel like it wouldn't just be like in a media scrum to us. I feel like they would have to do the full rollout, right? Like you need to have the social media presence of it and to have like a little video and to have some words from the player who was just named captain. Like I feel like that's something you would do a whole, you would do a whole song and dance for. So I don't know that even if it had been phrased differently, I think at most you would get like a no comment or something,
Yeah,
which would hint towards it maybe.
Yeah, we would get the same information either way. And it's one of those where you kind of have to ask, even though you know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But just in case, yeah. So we'll see it puck drop tomorrow.
Yeah. And we'll see. I don't entirely know that this team needs one again. Like it's one of those where it's
well, that's one thing I was going to ask you, right?
Just,
because the way he sounded, it's the first time I've had any doubt as to whether or not they would name a captain. I still think it's more likely than not that they do.
Me too.
But I wouldn't be as shocked, I guess, tomorrow if there's just the A's on the jerseys come the home opener.
You have the built-in with Dan being a newcomer as the coach, and you have new potential options on the team as well that could reasonably be named captain. Mostly Brandon Montour is who I'm thinking of and talking about here. But you have the built-in kind of buffer of you could wait 10, 15, 20 games into the year and then name a captain and just say, look, we wanted to give Dan a look at the roster when, the heat was on, when they were in the trenches, when they were getting things done, when they were actually playing meaningful games, right? And I feel like that is very much something that we might see happen where, yes, you give it a little while, you let everybody settle in, you wait and see who really starts becoming the person who's vocal in the locker room, who starts speaking up when they're down 2 goals heading into the third period. If somebody's naturally going out there and making speeches in the locker room to fire guys up and then they come out and they play well in the third, you kind of give yourself the ability to see this group, which has some new faces, has a lot of new feel and identity to it because of the new coaching staff and everything. You give them a chance to kind of prove themselves first, and then you pick somebody based on how well they've proven themselves, rather than just kind of arbitrarily giving it to the guy that everybody calls dad.
Right. and I would have no problem with that. And I'll stay consistent on this because at the start of training camp, I said the one thing that I was hoping from their captain search was that it was not predetermined already, that it would be more or less an open, I don't want to call it competition, right? But that it would be open and they would read it based off what has happened or what would happen, right? And if they don't name a captain to start the season, I think that pretty much proves that it is not predetermined, that they hadn't decided something ahead of time that they were going to name a captain. So I'd have no problem with it. And I think that's a totally fine way to go about it. I don't think they should feel any extra pressure just because they're the only team in the NHL that doesn't have one. You've had teams go without captains plenty in the past. It's not something they should worry about. So I wouldn't mind it at all. But I still think it's more likely than not that we see a player named captain tomorrow. If they do name a captain by puck drop, who do you think it is? Basically, what are the odds? How would you kind of handicap the odds at this point? Just based on your intuition, what do you think?
I mean, it would be Eberle, right? Like
it would have to be.
It would have to be at that point, right? I can't imagine you would just go based off of preseason and training camp and give it to somebody's like a Brandon Montour. Like that would be kind of unprecedented to do something like that. I feel like when you have somebody like Eberle, and that's what I was going to say, right? I said it would feel kind of arbitrary just because he's been the de facto guy these last couple seasons. But at the same time, he's also kind of makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, right? Like there's a reason everybody calls him dad. It's not just because he's, the oldest guy in the room, right? It's also because he has, helped out younger players in the past and kind of taken on some of those more captainly responsibilities. Like that has been his role with this team since year one. So to name him captain would not be I think a mistake. I don't think it would be an issue at all. I just think that I mean at this point, RJ, I honestly don't care who it is. I just want it kind of to be dealt with one way or another.
Right. So we don't have all the questions. That's really what it is. I
Yeah,
just kind of want it settled one way or the other. I don't really care who it is. And I get that gets to the next question I was going to ask you is really how much does it even matter? And
right.
particularly if it's Eberly, I just don't think it matters that all
I
that
don't
much
either.
because and I've said this even all off season, right? Slapping a C on someone's chest doesn't change who they are as a
Hmm.
person. It doesn't necessarily change their leadership style. And I don't think it would really be the case with Eberly, right? He's been in that room for 4 years. He is who he is. Changing his whole leadership style or demeanor, I think would seem really fake, certainly if you're to start doing it right now, right? So he's not going to do that. So I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter a ton, I think.
Right, and I think a lot of the reason people have been pushing for it is because of the way last year went and the feeling that, you know, look, the locker room kind of got away from itself and things went off the rails and there was nobody really around to kind of pull it together. And again, I don't know that if any of those people had a C on their chest last year that it would have mattered, right? Like the culture was gone at that point. Like everything was had been washed away. Eh, You know, at any point anybody had the chance, regardless of whether or not they had a letter on their sweater to step up and try to stop the bleeding. And whether or not they did, we will never know because we're not in the rooms in those situations. But it's obvious that whether people were or weren't, it didn't fix anything, right? Like nothing substantially changed. And I don't know that having a captain in a situation like that changes things. I think having a culture from the top down changes those things. And a captain can certainly be a part of that. But I think it's more of a larger scale issue. What we saw last year was not just, oh, the absence of a captain meant that this thing went off the rails. It was no, it was kind of an absence of culture for everybody to fall back on and to have. And I think that that's one of the big things that Dan has been trying to address as the new coach. And one of the things he's really been talking about and what he talked about today, too, right? Like he's very focused on building an identity for this team and setting expectations for this group of how they should play each and every night. And by just establishing that baseline, holding people accountable to that baseline, I think you solve a lot of the issues from last year. Again, whether or not somebody has a C on their chest, just because that's kind of it felt like what was missing last year, and it made it so that there was no floor for them to kind of hit and bounce back off of. Right, like they just kind of kept falling, and there was no like stopgap anywhere that anybody could just kind of like hit and be like, okay, this is our rock bottom, we can build back up from here. They just kind of kept falling. Feels like the culture and a lot of the stuff they've been doing this offseason is just to establish that floor that if things start going bad, if you start hitting a losing skid and you drop 3 or 4 games in a row, you're going to hit this level and everybody's going to then ramp back up from there and you're going to be able to get out of it. And I think that that stuff is super important. It was very, very much needed for this team. But again, it's not really related to whether or not the team has a captain.
Right. And you need that to be accepted and bought into by everybody to a man, or else it's just not going to work. And that's really what they need to work on. So yeah, as much as we've talked about the captain situation, probably doesn't matter all that much. So we'll see if we get an answer by tomorrow. Knowing how this has gone in the past, we might get an answer, an hour after we posted this
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
It could be that. But given that that's the case, I think we probably spent enough time on that.
Yep.
Now I want to open up this mailbag.
All right.
So let's dive right in. Let's get to the questions here. And we'll start with a couple that kind of preseason related. As the other thing that's happened is the Kraken have made their final roster cuts. They've cut down the roster. They've sent some guys to the minors. And so this one from Skipper: did all the guys that were waived clear waivers, particularly Myers, Stevens, Byro, hoping they'll be stalwarts for Coachella Valley and possible injury replacements for the Kraken? Olofsson too. I thought he had a good camp. So the quick answer is yes. All the guys who were waived did clear waivers. They've all survived that trip down to Coachella Valley. And we now have the Kraken have a little more flexibility now too, because as you can then bring up players like we've seen with Josh Mahura. They waived him, sent him down, and then it brought him back up. And so now he won't require waivers until he has 10 games with the Kraken or 30 cumulative days on the NHL roster. So now it buys you a little bit of flexibility as well. The other thing too, just for explaining, especially for newer fans, kind of how the waivers thing works, if you're trying to follow it and keep track of, did my team's player get claimed or not? So waivers are published every day at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So 11 a.m. Pacific time, the waivers are published, and the first people to get access to them are like the insiders, like Elliot Friedman, Chris Johnston. So the best way to get that news fast is to follow one of the two of them, and they will post the waivers updates for that given day. And so then the next day, a player is on waivers for 24 hours. So if they're waived one day, you can check at 11 o'clock the next day to see if they were claimed.
Yes. And basically this time of year, nobody really gets claimed, right? Like there's been 3 or 4 players, I think, claimed around the league just as teams have been making their final cuts. So, because everybody's in the same boat at the end of training camp. You're all waiving a bunch of guys. For the most part, you've just spent the last month figuring out what your roster is going to be. You're not then going to be out there on the waiver wire shopping unless you have a big hole to fill specifically and there's somebody out there that you like. So as much as we worry, it feels like every year, RJ, the lesson I've taken from this year with guys like John Hayden, Ben Myers, even Josh Mahura, right? Like an NHL defenseman, Kraken were able to waive and you know able to bring right back up. I think come training camp time, end of camp cuts, I just don't know that we really need to worry about waivers.
Not really. It's rare. Today was the big waiver day. There were 5 players that were claimed off of waivers. Yeah. And really, it's mostly goalies. You saw, Reimer and Patera being claimed, but those are the ones you really have to think about. Because if you waive a goalie, you might have to worry about, like we saw that with Magnus Hellberg with the Kraken, and right. They sent him down. But if it's a skater, probably don't have to worry about it in most cases. So that's just one of the realities of those cut down days. And teams will try and throw a bunch of guys on waivers all on the same day, so that they kind of get lost in the shuffle and people can't claim everybody too. So there's a strategy to it as well. So next question here. This one's salary cap related. This one's from Sherry. How many other teams are close to or over their salary cap? Who will have the hardest time meeting the cap, and what are their options? So that's, I'm sure, a reference also to the Kraken being so close to the salary cap. They did just sneak under it with their latest roster moves. They have about $4,000 in salary cap space, which is not very much. And so that's something we've documented, how close they are to the salary cap. But they're not the only team that's really close to the cap. And so there's some others as well. I mean, I think of the Colorado Avalanche, who have about 28K in space per Puckpedia, but a lot of that is also based on a guy like Valeri Nichushkin, who is, I think, suspended or whatever. It says suspended on here, but there's, so his cap doesn't count. They're going to have to figure out a solution to that. The Hurricanes are very close. They're going to have to cut one more guy, I think, to get under the cap. And so there's a few teams they're still working their way down.
Yes. But a lot of it is like, if you were to look at a Puckpedia or Cap Wages or whatever, I mean, some of it still has not taken into like LTIR players into account for some groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true. Like you look at, Montreal, it looks like they're 1.2 million over the cap, but they've got Carey Price's contract to send down to LTIR. So they'll work on that.
They'll be about 9 million under.
Yes, they'll have plenty of space.
Yes. Yeah. Washington, right, is 9 million over, but I believe they have
Oshie, I know, for starters.
Oshie for starters. I think multiple options, and Backstrom.
So that's right. Oshie and Backstrom are going to count for a lot. So.
Combined 15 million that they're going to be setting down. They'll be fine. So, look, the Kraken they're right there with anybody else, right? Any of the other top teams that are going to be dealing with not having a lot of cap space. The Kraken are absolutely there. I think the main thing is, it's not a big deal if you're right up against the cap, right? As long as you're under it, you're fine. That's what's important. I think the thing with the Kraken to keep in perspective is the fact that they're there with a 21-man roster, so it's not even a full roster, and you're kind of pushing this. And really, all of the other teams, RJ, that they're in, company with up there, are teams that are like going for the Stanley Cup, right? Like they're
Yeah,
cup
they're cup
contenders.
contenders.
They're like legit cup
Colorado,
contenders.
Carolina, yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like they're up there. The Rangers, Dallas, like all of these teams that are up there with like sub $1 million in cap space are all going to be teams that you're expecting to see deep into playoff runs. And the Kraken aren't really one of those teams. And so I think that's the thing that I kind of keep having to remind myself is like, look, it's kind of crazy that the Kraken are in this spot where they have to go with less guys on the roster to barely sneak under the cap by $4,000. And oh yeah, it's a team that like on the high end of anybody's projections just barely makes the playoffs. And
Right.
so,
It's not necessarily the lack of cap space that is a problem always, right?
yes,
It's what is
it's
that
where you're
paying for?
spending it. Yeah.
Right. And what are you getting for it? And like with a team like Vegas and all their shenanigans every year to, stay under the cap and all that. Well, it's obvious what they're paying for and what they're doing. They've won a Stanley Cup. They're a cup contender, as a lot of these teams are. And so you have to look at what you're getting. This is it. This is
Yeah.
what they've got. This is what they paid for. So
Yeah. So that's, not to be a downer about it, but as we're talking about the cap, I feel like it's important to put it in perspective of like they're hanging out with like the big dogs and they're not really a big dog, right? Like this is the Chihuahua hanging out with the big dogs being like, yeah, I belong here. And the big dogs are letting them hang out there. But like when push comes to shove.
Yeah. Chihuahua's got some expensive bling on,
Yeah, yes, exactly. So
all right. So on to maybe a more positive note here, talking about the Kraken. So this question from Max: is there any particular addition or move the team made this offseason you were really excited about?
All right. I mean,
you look at the additions they made, really, on the ice, this team is only two, maybe two and a half, like two or three, depending on how you want to look at it, players different than they were last year. So I feel like it kind of narrows it down.
yes, I was gonna say, like the one I was most excited about beforehand was Brandon Montour, and I was even still, it was like you know, lukewarm level of excitement of like, okay, you're bringing in another defenseman. Okay, it kind of helps round out the decor, gives you another option on the power play. He's a good player, good guy, like all that kind of stuff. Seeing him on the ice with the Kraken, seeing him in the locker room, seeing his personality and what he's just added to this team, I don't know that anybody outside of like Coach Dan Bylsma himself has breathed more life into this organization, RJ, than Brandon Montour. So like after going through camp, watching him in the preseason, watching him interact with fans and how the fan base has embraced him and is really excited by him. I feel like it's impossible to say anybody but Brandon Montour here.
If you're going with a player, absolutely. No, he's been as advertised in this preseason, this training camp, and he would be the obvious player answer for me. The way I just ranked it here in my notes, I said Dan, Jess, Bob, Montour, and Stevenson in that order. But as a player, Montour for sure. But really, the big addition is the coaching staff. That's the one that has me most excited.
Yeah, and there's a ton of reasons to be, right? Like we said, like I was talking about earlier.
It's been most of our last two podcasts, I feel like.
It really has been. But the Kraken had significant on-ice and off-ice issues. And the coaching staff seems to be addressing both of them, right? On the ice, the Kraken had issues in the offensive zone. There was little puck movement. There wasn't a lot of player movement. The power play was a disaster. All of those things. We're already seeing a lot of that get course corrected by the new coaching staff, right? Power play. Yeah, it wasn't great final numbers wise, percentage wise for the preseason, but give it time, right? It's the thing they've had the least amount of time to work on. You give them, 10, 15, 20 games into the regular season, then we'll start to be able to truly judge it. But looking at the growth over the course of the preseason of the puck movement, the player movement in the offensive zone, the fact that the lines could get mixed up and yet players were still trusting that regardless of who they were out there with, somebody's going to be in this spot. Somebody's going to be over here. I can just start throwing the puck to this space and trust that somebody's going to be there. That did not exist last year. And that kept the Kraken from scoring a lot of goals. And I think that we started to see that at the end of the preseason here as the Kraken were starting to score goals because they had some good puck movement, right? They were getting the puck over to guys that were in shooting areas, and also they were in shooting areas and they were open because of what the rest of the group was doing to draw away coverage. So I love that aspect of it. And then I kind of spoke earlier about the off ice component of what was kind of missing from the organization, and how the new coaching staff, just by establishing that baseline, establishing those expectations, having a certain level of work ethic that Dan Bylsma is going to hold all of the members of this team accountable to, is going to really help things from ever getting as bad as they got last year. And that's, again, something really worth it, not necessarily looking forward to, because it's only going to show itself when things are kind of bad or the team is struggling. But just the fact that, you know, it's kind of there, it's going to help us that when the team does lose 2 or 3 games, RJ, it's not going to be the same questions as last year of like, oh man, I wonder how big this one gets. Right? Like that's kind of how it was last year. I remember doing post games, they'd be like 5 losses in and you're just like, will it stop soon? I don't know. Like it might not.
Yeah, and I think just about everybody has that memory from last year, at least clear enough in their minds, right? To still appreciate even when a 3-game losing streak is just that, a 3-game losing streak and not more. So you're right. I think that is important. Next question here from Lindsay. What player or players surprised you most in the preseason? Could be someone that exceeded expectations, or maybe someone you thought underperformed, and why? So is there anyone that comes to mind immediately for you? I can start if you want.
I mean, yeah, I'll let you start, but I will say Brandon Montour, right? Like just because
Yes.
of how much energy and excitement he brings, and the way he just, it just feels like he elevates everybody on the ice when he's out there. I think that was something that I was not necessarily expecting, but has been very welcome to observe.
Right. And I knew people had said something like that, right? You know, he's a great guy in the room. He's good to have, good personality wise, but I don't think either of us knew just how great he would end up being. So
How much that was
that's
needed
one.
here.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm looking at just the on ice stuff, I, I would have been tempted to say Andre Burakovsky had he not gotten hurt. And that's, you know, probably the least surprising thing we could have seen, but just how well he actually played in his time in the preseason, right?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I had forgotten that he could do that. I had forgotten just how effective and just how good he was, because we really didn't see it much last season because he was dealing with all those injuries. And so that did actually surprise me a little bit to see him there in that form again. It wasn't something I was sure I would see again.
Yeah, I thought about saying him, but really, I feel like I've been one of his lone defenders out there, in that, like, no, he's a good player once you put him in a spot where he can kind of utilize his skills. And I feel like the new systems are kind of opening that up for him, and we've kind of seen that through the preseason when he's been able to play. He's looked good, and he's looked like the Berkey that, you know, the team thought they were getting when they signed him as a free agent a couple off seasons ago. So I'm there with you. I think, like, I don't know that anybody's like looked bad to me, RJ. Like nobody stood out and looked bad. There's maybe been some guys that I thought maybe would jump off the page a little bit more, but some of them are kind of like explained away, right? Like the big one for me is Yanni Gord. Like he's just looked like whatever through so far through camp and whatnot. But really, Yanni Gord, where does Yanni Gord, you know, make his money? It's in, you know, pissing off an opponent and getting under their skin and going to the net and stirring the pot and all of that kind of stuff. He's not going to do that through training camp, right? Like that's not where it comes out. So I'm willing to give, you know, a guy like him kind of a pass, just because his game really doesn't get started until you're in an actual game.
Yeah, and I feel like you can explain away, yeah, a lot of the ones. Yanni Gord was actually the one I had on my list. Just he hasn't stood out a ton, but you know, how can you expect him to? You can't be the pepper pot in practice. So that's one name. I mean, there are also ones like, you know, maybe Philip Grubauer kind of had some off days during camp or
Yeah.
whatever in some of the practices where, you know, he wasn't looking
Yeah.
very good, but it's very different than a game type situation, right? And we know Grubauer, you know, the bigger the game, the more he locks in. And so, you know, in practice might not look the best sometimes, but it's kind of hard to extrapolate from that, really. So that was the other name that I was thinking. I mean, the one more positive one that impressed me, I know he's already been sent down a while ago, Nicholas Coco. He
Yeah.
might have been the most,
Yeah.
the player who exceeded my expectations the most out of all of camp. And also with the roster cuts for the Firebirds today, he's going to start the season as one of Coachella Valley's 2 goalies. It'll be
Should.
him and Alex Piska to start the season. I thought he was the 3rd best goalie through all of camp.
He
So,
was. Yeah.
Good that the org seemed to see that.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy about that. I'm sure depending on how things go for him in CV and what split Coach Laxdal wants to use the goaltenders with, he's going to really rely on Stezzy to start the season, whatnot, kind of 1A, 1B, or whatever it is. We might see him go down to Kansas City just for some opportunities to start, but he looked so ready for that. Like to anybody who saw him, this shouldn't be surprising. Right. And I think the only shame of it all is that we didn't get to see him get some preseason action.
I know. I wanted to see that, but unfortunately didn't work out that way. But as we talked about last week, right? Grubauer and Decord, they needed those reps. That was actually important for them to get.
Yeah.
So you don't want to sacrifice that. So that all makes sense.
I have one more name to ask your opinion on, RJ.
Ooh,
and that's Riker Evans. Because he's kind of in the same boat with like a Yanni Gourde for me, in the sense that I just haven't really noticed him. And I don't know that that's necessarily bad, but I haven't really noticed him.
Well, here's the thing with Evans, at least just in my estimation of the preseason, right? I think he's had his ups and he's had his downs. I mean, we remember the downs. Remember that one game where it was at Edmonton where he was on the ice for, I think, 4 of the 5 goals against, and we noticed him a lot there. I think it took some time for him to gel with Will Borgen or gel with some of the players he was playing with. Adam Larson seemed like the only kind of natural one that he was playing with, but he had experience with him last season. Defensively, I have noticed him, but maybe not in the best way defensively throughout the preseason. And so I think that's something, he still needs to work on. I guess I have noticed some positive things too. Like there's some times where he'll be really physical with guys in the corner to the point where I'm just like, don't take a penalty. But he doesn't. He's really good at towing that line. But he's always been that way. So it didn't really change from my expectations. And then offensively, I haven't noticed him a ton. There've been a few moments where he's done that thing where he likes to come in along the boards, go behind the goal line and try and find somebody. He has done that a couple times, but I think especially as the roster has been cut down and you're seeing something more like what you would see for the NHL season, right? He's not going to get as much opportunity as he did at the end of last season because of the addition of Brandon Montour, because everybody, at least right now, knock on wood, is healthy. He's not going to get those same chances. He's not going to get power play time. He's going to be a proper third pairing defenseman, because you look at those top 2 pairs of Dunn Larson, Alexiak, Montour. Those are 2 big minute pairs.
Yes.
You can play those guys for 22, 23 minutes a night and be just fine. And it's going to take away some opportunity from Riker Evans. So I think he's going to be less in the spotlight this year. Hopefully it gives the team a chance to kind of manage the spots they put him in, him in some favorable situations where he can find success. But I don't think he's going to jump off the page for us really this season as much as he otherwise would.
I agree with that. And that's just the feeling that I've been getting from camp. I wonder,
do you think it's stunting his development? Like, are you worried about that? Or?
No, I think that I'm starting to wonder though, like, the one game in Edmonton obviously wasn't good. I still have my thoughts and doubts on the pairing of Evans and Borgen together. Like, they just do not, in my mind, complement each other like at all in their playing styles or anything. Like it just feels like a leftovers type unit. I do wonder though if we do see a shakeup, because all through camp, right, what's one of the things Dan has been saying in regards to the defensive pairings? I want to see guys play with other guys. And then what did we not really see all through camp? Guys playing with other guys, right? Like, they've been set as these D pairs from day one, despite the fact that we were being told, oh, I want to see them play. And I guess technically for some of the preseason games, you saw them play with other guys, but that was only because, like, their partner wasn't playing in the game, right? And it was very hit or miss, and it wasn't all that much. So I still wonder if we see something, they wait and they look at things 5, 10, 15 games into the season, and then maybe we see a little bit of a shuffle somewhere just to move things around.
Yeah, I think we might. And look, this blue line over the last couple of years has been so uncommonly healthy.
Yes.
How long can you expect that to go on? I know they had the Dunn injury at the end of last year, but still, like, over the course of a season, you usually get at least one injury on defense. So that might shake everything up to the point where you will need to see different combos.
Well, and I want to see situations too, and we've talked about this. There's 5 minutes left. You're down by a goal. Just go to a 3-man rotation of Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, and Riker Evans, right? Like, or there's 7 minutes left, whatever, right? Like, I want to see kind of stuff like that, and I do wonder if the coaching staff's going to find ways of moving Riker up the lineup, because hey, look, it's Dan. He knows what Riker's capable of. He's had him for 2 years in CV. He's relied heavily on him for 2 years in CV. I gotta think that he knows what Riker can bring to this team and what he can do. And there's going to be situations that develop in which he's going to lean on his guy, and that is Riker Evans, and put him in that spot and be unafraid to do so. It's just right now through training camp, I just kind of haven't seen too much of that.
Yeah. And so we'll see what kind of opens up for him. So, we talked about Dan, he's the coach, and there's different things that he can do with the lines, with the D pairings. But Dylan, now it's time for you to be the coach, for us to be the coach, because this question from Chuck: how would you each construct the forward lines if you were the coach? Assuming the roster we have today is the one you have to work with, what would your 2 power play line, and also what would your 2 power play lines be? Your 2 power play units. So as far as the forward lines, and I did give you a little heads up on this question, just to give you some time to think about it. So I told you at morning skate, and your response to me, or not morning skate, I told you at practice, felt like a morning skate. And your response to me was, well, the lines as they are right now are pretty similar to what I would want. So Dylan, would you make any changes? What would the forward lines be if it was up to you?
There's only one change as I was thinking about it that I think I would change, and I don't even know that I would, but there's only one thing I can think of with this group, because I think as much as I don't love the Borgen Evans combo, I don't know what I would change on the blue line. Like, it just is set. Like, for whatever reason, it is just set in stone. Offensively, up front with the forward group, the only change I would make is I would probably go ahead and put Jordan Eberle back with Shane Wright to start the season, and I would bump Bjorkstrand up to play with Maddie and McCann. I would do that one swap. Like, but that's literally it, right? I'm already getting what I want. I got Tolvin in with Wright. Like, that's what I wanted. It's just that I also wanted Ebbs there.
Yeah, and you like the Schwartz, Stevenson, Burakovsky enough that you wouldn't change it?
Yeah, I think it's been working, right? Berkey seems maximized for the first time in a long time with this team, so I don't think you can change that. Schwartz, I feel like it's a good spot for him, right? Like, you're getting Schwartz top 6 or middle 6 at the very least minutes, which I feel like he needs, and he's going to be able to help you out net front. And Chandler Stevenson, look, he's a guy who can handle that kind of same responsibility of having those minutes and being up there. Like, that's it in some ways for me, that's my forwards leftover line, but it actually kind of all works together because you have the net front presence of Jaden Schwartz with the kind of passing playmaking out there that Berkey and Chandler Stevenson can kind of feed off of each other with.
Right. So, I mean, for me, with these 12 forwards that the Kraken have, I kind of had a similar line of thinking in that it's pretty good as is given the 12 that you have. The shakeup that I might make, or that I'd want to see, I would have liked to see it kind of more in the preseason, but we didn't have all these. Well, really, Burakovsky wasn't healthy the whole time, or McCann, I guess, at the end. But I would have liked to see McCann with Stevenson and Burakovsky, because I like that pairing. Because when you approach forward lines, coaches will usually just have 2 guys they kind of stick together, and then a third they pair them with. And I like the Stevenson-Burakovsky pair. I think they complement each other. I think they work well together. And I want to see, especially if Stevenson is going to get more ice time, because that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it too, is I want more of a traditional ice time distribution among my forwards, unlike the Hackstall thing where they all get, 13 or 14 minutes, right? Or I guess 15 or 16, right? I want a first line that if they're really humming, that they can get 21, 22 minutes. And I want Jared McCann as part of that. And so having him with Beniers and Eberle, I just feel like that's not strong enough necessarily to kind of give those minutes. So I want to see what that looks like. I'd bump Schwartz down with Beniers and Eberle, because I know Schwartz and Eberle have good chemistry together. And then you kind of have Maddie there. I mean, maybe it's a little too defensively responsible, but the other thing I look at too, because you have Tolvin and Wright and Bjorkstrand, and I know you've taken your victory on lap on that. I know it looks good, but the other thing I might want to see or try is Yanni Gord in that spot instead of Tolvanen.
Mhm.
Gord right in Bjorkstrand, because I think Yanni would do a good job of the, kind of the Tolvanen type of thing, but also he could dig those pucks out. We talked about that possibility
Yeah.
in the past. And I think, again, as a fourth line center all season, it's kind of wasted. So I'd like to see something that could get him up into the top 9 at least. And so with these 12, he can't really do it because, I mean, I guess you'd have Ty Karche be fourth line center. But what I would do is I would trade Tanev or scratch him,
Yeah.
honestly. Bring Ben Myers up to be the fourth line center and have like a, maybe a Tolvanen Myers Karche kind of line, or you could swap out Hayden there if you wanted.
I mean, I don't hate that, and I think it would be exactly what Dan wants as far as like a skating group that's going to get out there and really come after you. And hey, if you're fourth line and their job is just to go out there and keep the other team busy while your top 3 lines are resting, well, hey, guess what? That's what a fourth line's supposed to do, right? We haven't really been in that spot with the Kraken because they've been so deep, right? In the past, we've had scoring fourth lines. They've been the best offensive line the team has had at times back in the Morgan Geeky Daniel Sprong days. But I feel like that is, if you have a fourth line that's just going to keep the other team tired and occupied while your top 9 are getting a rest, I like that. I want that from a fourth line, and I think come playoff time that could be valuable. What's interesting is, as I'm thinking about this, RJ, and I feel like you might be there too. Doesn't it feel like, regardless of what the wingers we place them with, Matty Beniers and Chandler Stevenson, don't you just kind of have like a feeling of like when you're making the lines, you're like, well, they're there because they have to be there. Right? Like,
Yeah.
you're talking about having whichever line you want to have out there that you can lean on and play 22 minutes a night and be the line. Even just like right now, isn't that going to be the Shane Wright line? Like, he's the only one I trust out of this center group to bring anything offensive consistently, right? Just to generate offense consistently, Shane Wright is the only one on this team.
Yeah, really, he is, and that's why another reason why I think it's good they're starting him out with the Tolvanen and Bjorkstrand thing. I think it's a good way to ease him in. But at the end of the day, and this is why I don't necessarily worry about it, but I don't love McCann with Beniers long term, is just because I think at the end of the day, you probably have Shane Wright realistically is that 2C or the offensively producing one. And maybe that means less ice time for Matty's line further down the road. And so that's why I want to experiment with ways that you can give Shane Wright better wingers and maybe not give Matty Beniers the best winger the team has.
Yeah. I don't hate McCann with Stevenson just because Stevenson's probably the best passer. So, like that kind of naturally lends itself, to the two guys playing together. But yeah, it does feel like, and maybe it doesn't happen this year because it's Shane's first full season at the NHL level. Although just watching him through the preseason, RJ, I'm starting to wonder more and more. Like, yeah, he'll hit a rookie wall, but I don't know that it's going to totally stop the kid.
Just looking at, I think, what did we set the over under at? Right, it was like 20 goals or something.
Yeah,
I'm so confident on the over.
I feel pretty good about that.
He's gonna produce.
He's just so smart in the offensive zone. The places he puts himself in are just so smart, and it's the size, it's the physical ability for him, RJ, because he wants to be on the inside. He wants to be in that lower slot, and he can just make it so. Like, he knows how to use his body. He's very strong in his upper body. He knows how to box guys out. Just watching him in drills yesterday, he literally like threw Adam Larson off of him and then went over and like knocked down Jamie Alexiak just to establish himself net front. He was just like, no, this is my spot. Sorry, guys. And it's like, okay, like maybe the rookie wall won't be quite a problem for him because, yeah, even if he kind of hits a scoring slump, he's going to be disruptive. Like, that's not going to go away. His ability just to muscle guys out, box guys out from what they want to do. I just think that he has that it factor in the offensive zone that I don't know anybody else on this team really has outside of Jared McCann, but certainly amongst the centers, nobody else has it.
Right. Now, he is getting power play time also, and we
Yes.
can kind of segue over to what you would do for the 2 power play units. This one, it's a little more interesting, I think, because there's a lot of different ways you could go with this.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start? Or do you want
I was going to say go for it because, to be honest, I have no idea. Right? Like, I feel like we haven't really gotten to see too many reps from the power play units that the team has put together. it's more so like I have a handful of guys that I would want in a handful of spots, but then kind of whoever's around them, I just kind of let that like get figured out by like who's hot, right?
Right. And that's kind of how I've tackled this because I put together a couple of units here. And obviously, you have Montour quarterbacking one unit, you have Dunn quarterbacking the other. So those are kind of locked in,
Yeah.
right? On the Montour unit, the first thing I think of with him too is the shot that he brings from the point, and it's not necessarily a bomb like some of these other guys will do, but he's really good at getting the puck through traffic and putting it in
Mhm.
good positions to be tipped. And so I want a net front guy who's going to be good with that. And I initially put Matty Beniers there net front because I think I really believe in the upside of him there. I know you
Yeah.
pointed it out last season, right? But after watching training camp, watching the preseason, and especially through practice, he's got that chemistry with Jaden Schwartz more than he does with Matty Beniers.
Yeah.
So I put Schwartz there net front,
Yep.
Montour quarterbacking it.
Yep.
And so then on that unit, I would go, and this is tough because on the left side, Jared McCann is probably your best power play scorer, and you could put him there left side. But I think with the looks that you want to set up from this unit, maybe Chandler Stevenson is a better fit in that spot. And I want Shane right in the bumper spot.
Mhm.
I want him kind of finding all those, loose areas in the slot where you could find him. And then I want Burakovsky on the other wing because he is a left-hand shot. He doesn't have the best one-timer. We talked about it during one of their last preseason games. Not the best spot for him one-timer wise, but I'm just going, this is the all vision unit, right? Stevenson has the vision in the passing. Burakovsky has the vision in the passing. Find a Jaden Schwartz net side or net front for a tip. Find Shane Wright in a soft area in the slot, and just kind of have that be the guys on the ends job: Stevenson, Montour, and Burakovsky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you for most of that, right? Like I think power play unit 1 has to be Montour. It's got to be Schwartz up front. It's got to be Shane in the bumper. I like having Berkey out there, and I like Berkey being there on the one side. I'm not sold on Stevenson on the power play yet. I haven't seen it come to fruition yet. Him using his vision on the power play. So I don't know that I would want him there. I don't hate the idea of having Jared McCann still in his spot just because Montour's going to be able to get him the puck in different ways and with different looks. He's going to be able to move around so much more than what he was able to before, right? Like we haven't seen Jared McCann operate that spot on the power play really outside of the Paul McFarland. You've got 2 square feet of ice in which you can, exist in. You better not leave it, right? Like we haven't seen Jared McCann just kind of let loose and have player movement. And I want to give him the opportunity because, hey, that's what he does at 5-on-5. And you know what? He's pretty darn good 5-on-5. So I feel like having the extra space out there, if you give him the freedom to move around and you have guys like an Andre Burakovsky on the other side and a Brandon Montour quarterbacking the power play, they're going to be able to find him as he finds the little gaps that he's going to want to sit in or where he feels like he's got good vision and a lane to take to the net. So I want him there. But otherwise, yeah, I think Schwartz net front makes the most sense. Shane has looked fantastic in the bumper spot. That's where he naturally wants to play at any, regardless of if they have the man advantage or 5-on-5. Like I just said, he wants to be in the slot. He wants to be in the lower slot. That's all good. And then, yeah, Berkey just looks like a different guy out there, knowing that he can move around. I think if you have Berkey, Montour, and McCann all kind of shifting around with player movement up top, things are going to open up. Like things will absolutely open up, and I'd rather have them moving rather than kind of having 2 guys trying to feed passes to the inside or down low from the sides. I'd rather have my guys just all moving around as a unit, waiting for somebody to get lost in coverage. I think that's more so what my philosophy on the power play would be.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking a little too inside the box there with McCann, and then maybe he would be good with a lot of that movement. We haven't fully seen it yet.
There is also like the element of like, this is like the one dude who has produced goals for you with any sort of consistency for years. How do you not have him out there on the power on PP1, right? Like there is an element of that with me. Like I understand where you're coming from, and he has in the past been a bit of a one-trick pony out there that you don't necessarily want to be that telegraphed to a penalty kill unit. But I think because you're giving guys kind of the freedom to move around, I feel like he should be able to take that freedom and do something with it.
And I think regardless of how they organize these units, it's going to be more of a 1A and 1B situation. You're not going to have, I don't think, a proper power play one unit, or, whoever's hot might be that, but I don't
Mhm.
think you're going to have, it's not as cut and dry as with other teams because look, this team doesn't have a star player.
Right.
And that's what you normally base it around. So the other thing with McCann on the other unit, because I'll get into the next unit that I had. So I kept McCann and Dunn together because maybe I'm wrong on this. This would be a good question even to just quickly ask like the players themselves, right? But I feel like having a lefty as the power play quarterback, it's a little easier for them to get the puck over to the left side in a way where McCann can then skate in and use that shot as opposed to Montour righty. I'm sure he can do it, but if you have somebody out pressuring, it's less distance for the puck to go. And so that's one reason I kind of kept the two of them together, McCann and Dunn. I have Beniers as the net front guy because I think he should be the second net front guy. I don't think you'll disagree on that. I've got Bjorkstrand playing the bumper because I think he's good in that spot. I don't think you'll disagree there. I'm not thrilled about it, but I've got Tolvanen on the right side. He's a one-timer threat at least. I still don't think if they had a real alternative, I don't think he's good enough to stay there as a one-timer threat. He's got that shot, but I don't know. Maybe they telegraphed it too much, but I wasn't thrilled by what I saw with it last season.
I would put Ebbs in that spot. And I would tell him just cheat low. Like play low. And I think Ebbs could be a good backdoor option, or he's going to be a guy who, when he has the puck, if he goes low, I feel like he has the vision to either get it to Matty on a backside play, or he can, move it to Bjorkstrand in the slot in a way where Bjorkstrand can then get a shot off from that bumper roll. But I think that's the one thing I would kind of change to that is I would probably have Eberle out there, but I would specifically tell him like kind of play low in the zone because that's where he has the best vision.
Yeah, I just hate having neither player on the wall on their offside. It just feels like maybe this is watching so much Paul McFarland power play over the last few years, right? Where it felt like the times that they did go with that, there was just no end goal.
Yeah.
Because nobody was in a position to shoot quickly. And so they just would keep cycling it back until they lost the puck. There's ways to get around that, I'm sure, but it still scares me.
I mean, look, with Matty, Bjorkstrand, and Ebbs, I feel like you could run a very Pittsburgh-esque triangle.
Yeah.
And so like if I was in charge, that's what I would be doing, right? If they're not going to be doing something then like that, then yeah, I think the personnel has to change. But if I'm in charge, then I would kind of have them do something like that, and I would have my two power play units running different things.
Okay.
I don't,
and that's something you can do as a coach, right?
Yeah.
That is an option you have available to you. So one more assignment here as the coach before we take our coach hats off. This one also from Chuck. Again, you're the coach. You guys have watched the players in shootout drills recently. Who would your three shooters be in a shootout? If you pick a defenseman, so clearly anticipating my answer.
Yes.
Do you think any of the forwards would feel disrespected, or do you think they'd all be cool with it? So I'll start with the second question. I don't think anybody would feel disrespected by anybody else being picked in the shootout. They're teammates. It's a team.
Yeah.
The coach makes that decision. They're all professionals. As for the shooters, I've been on record with this before. Borgen, Alexiak, Larson. Those are your three shootout shooters. They are the team's three best shooters. You may not like it, but that is what optimal shootout performance looks like. So that's my take. Dylan, do you disagree?
I haven't seen nearly as much of these players in shootout drills as you have, right? Like I just have not seen it. So I don't know that I totally have as much of a read on it. That being said, I can say this honestly, because this is what I did when I coached. I would look at the bench and I'd say, who wants it? And the person who puts up their head, their hand and says, I want this, or I've got this, that's who I go with. And I feel like in a shootout, if a guy's feeling good about this particular goaltender, maybe they scored on him with a breakaway early or something like that, or they feel like, oh man, I'm in the zone right now and I know I could pull off this move. I think you give them the freedom to go out there and you do it, and you kind of want and you build that culture, and then you find a way of really rewarding the guys who take those chances and go out there to encourage other guys to put their hand up. But I did that when I coached kids. It actually more often than not did work by just being like, who's feeling it? Who wants this right now? And just going with whoever did that. And I think doing that at the NHL level would be pretty fascinating, but I think that it would work. Like, it's a shootout. It's there's no strategy to it, right? In the set from a coaching standpoint entirely, right? Like, we act like there is, but guess what? There isn't, right? Like, it's, some guys are capable of making moves, other guys aren't. I feel like going based off vibes and confidence would be just as good as going off of the fact that it's like, oh, this guy can, make a good move with his backhand. Like, all right, sure. He's probably going to have roughly the same percentage as everybody else, because everybody in this league is what? Like, between 25 and 40%.
I'd say there's like 2 or 3 guys in the NHL who are more automatic than the rest.
Yeah.
But unless you have one of those guys,
there's nobody on this
you might
team
as well just pick somebody.
that's the case. So, like,
well, or getting up. They just don't know. But you're right. There's nobody like that on this team. Yeah, just go with whoever's feeling it. And if it's defenseman, all the better.
There's no 2013 UC Jokinen. Like there's no that on this team. So like I said, yeah, I feel going based off of who's feeling it in the moment, and who wants to step up and try to seize that moment. I think that's as good as anything.
All right. So the shootout is an area of weakness or has been an area of weakness for the Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
And so next question does concern areas of weakness. So this is from Cole. In your guys' opinion, as the roster currently stands, what is the team's biggest on-ice weakness as we approach the start of the season? You want to start this one, or should I?
It's probably pretty similar to last year in the sense that it's just going to be the ability to finish. Right. And to have guys that are going to score and be able to make big time plays in the offensive zone, right? Whether it's coming off of a rush and being able to make some stuff happen. I feel like the system that they're in and the way the coaching staff has worked with them, we're going to see more plays come off of that. Where I still have concerns is coming off of a cycle. Once you're already established in the offensive zone, your first chance didn't go in, but hey, guess what? You won the puck battle and now it's time to get to work. And all 10 players, all 10 skaters, right, are in the defensive, in that zone. What do? I still don't know that they have enough guys that are, slick enough with the puck, able to finish with a contested shot, be able to, make a cross zone pass through traffic and thread that needle. I still think that that's an area where they're lacking. I think a lot of their offense is going to come off of rushes this year. And I think that that's good, but I think when you're talking about those, like, it's in deep, everybody's there. What can you make happen? I just don't know that they have enough guys that can make something happen in those spots.
Yeah, that's more or less what I was going to say. It's the lack of star power that we've talked about plenty. When the defense is set up, like you mentioned, when the goalie is square, there are some players in the NHL that can just make it happen, that can make things happen by themselves because they are just that talented. And they can manufacture goals that way because they're just that good. The Kraken don't have any of those players. They didn't last year. Realistically, they still don't. They're going to have to create offense other ways, but it's really hard to compete with teams that do have a player like that. And in a close game where they can just make a goal out of nothing. And that's something that you're still going to have to overcome, because it means you just have to be that much more mistake-free. You're going to need to get that many more contributions from your depth guys. And so that is definitely the biggest weakness on ice, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So getting into the season actually starting, let's look forward here. This question from Sean: the Kraken have 11 games in October, 6 against playoff teams from last year. Is earning 13 points realistic? What's the fewest number of points the team can come out of October with before you're starting to worry about our playoff chances? So that's interesting. I feel like as far as a number of points, we can do the quick math here, and I'll let you think. When it comes to October, when it comes to the first month of the season, I'll say this. I feel like you certainly can't like guarantee a playoff spot, right? You can't secure it for yourself, but I feel like you can almost lose it, right? You can put
You can
yourself
certainly
so far
start to
behind
lose
the eight
it.
ball.
Yeah.
You can start to lose it. You can put yourself so far behind the eight ball that it's a real problem, but you can't put yourself far enough ahead that you're not going to have any problems potentially.
Hmm.
So it's really about just preventing the worst outcomes. And so even, heck, even what is it, 11 games in October?
Hmm.
You go 500, 11 points. Like that's not a playoff pace, but
No.
you're okay. You're still very much in it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking, right? Like, I feel like, you know, 10 points feels like the absolute floor, right? Like if you can't get 10 points out of the 11 games, that's that's kind of worrisome. I will say this though, right? Like I'm looking at it and there are good teams on this schedule, right? Like there's a lot of like surefire playoff teams on this
Mhm.
schedule that you just know are going to kind of be write-offs, right? Like, especially this early in the season, it's kind of hard to catch other, good teams like a Dallas, a Colorado, Toronto, even a Winnipeg or Carolina off guard just because it's so early in the season. So I think that, maybe, yeah, I'll say 10 points, right? Like I want to see 10 points out of the 11 games. I know that's not a lot and it doesn't sound great, but I think that it is a floor. It's an achievable floor. And look, every time we talk to Dan about anything, right? He's been talking about how he expects, like, whether it's with the players getting used to building their good habits or getting used to the systems in actual game speed and settings against a full NHL roster, he has made it very clear that the coaching staff's expectation is the first 20 games of the season, right? That's how long it's going to take to get this team to 100% of its capacity kind of thing, right? And so hearing that, thinking about everything that's changed over the offseason, thinking about where this team was coming from and what we were just talking about, how you don't have difference makers in certain areas and all that kind of stuff. I think, yeah, if we kind of give them 20 games of being around 500 and then you make your playoff push from there, I think that's very reasonable. And I think that that's something that the team itself has kind of been telling us to maybe set as the expectation. And I think that's a fair one. So coming out of October with 10 points, it would kind of be in line with what everything seems to be setting us up for.
Right. 10 points, I think, would be all right. The more I think about it, I actually will go down to like 8 points before I really get worried. If it's any less than that, I'm worried. But 8, I think I could still talk myself into being okay if it looks like things are coming along well. You know what I mean? If it looks
Mhm.
like there's progress being made, or if they're, real close games they lose in regulation to, if let's say, October 13th at Dallas, they lose 2-3 in regulation and put on a good push against a very good team.
Yeah.
But they don't get any points. If you're seeing those kinds of things, then I'll maybe feel more okay about it. But I think I could go as low as 8. But any lower than that, the alarm bells are really ringing.
A lot of it is just seeing this team beat the teams that they should beat and play well against the teams that they shouldn't beat, right? And I'm looking at the schedule. You've got a couple borderline playoff teams, like teams you're going to be battling with at the end of the year in St. Louis and Minnesota to start this off, right? Like they're going to be in the wild card hunt in the same way the Kraken probably will, which is to say, on the outside looking in. Get at least 2 points out of that, but ideally you would win both of those games. I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to beat Dallas or Nashville, so you could drop those two. You should, again, kind of on equal footing with the Flyers, but I think you should win that one. You should beat Calgary. Probably you should lose to Colorado, Winnipeg, and Carolina. You should beat Montreal, and then you should lose to Toronto. That's 10 points, right? You're beating the teams that you're on equal footing with or better than. You're losing to all of the teams that you on paper you are worse than. And I feel like if it just kind of shook out kind of that way, maybe you beat one of the good teams and you lose to one of the teams you're equal to. You lose to Minnesota, but you beat Winnipeg. I feel like that just it feels like after last year, that's a perfectly acceptable way to go through a month.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. And yeah, I didn't do the quick math in my head of like how many points that kind of turns out to be expected points or so. 10 does feel more reasonable when you kind of spell it out like that. But yeah, as long as I think it's going to be the underlying indications of how they're playing that's really going to inform things. In the first 10 games, at a certain point, you need to start
Yes.
banking points. You need to start, but 10 games is, or 11
Yeah.
games is still a little bit
Right.
early for that.
Month 2, if your expectation is to be in the playoffs, then those are the times where you absolutely have to beat teams like St. Louis, Minnesota, Philadelphia, right? Like that, then those become the games that you have to win and are games you're expected to win. But I feel like
Or in the actual month 2 schedule, you know, Columbus,
Yes.
Anaheim twice, San Jose twice. Those are the
well,
games.
those are really bad teams. Like you always are supposed to win those games. I'm saying
yes.
if you're thinking of the group as a playoff group, then guess what? You got to beat those other fringe playoff teams, and you have to beat them, every time you play them, and that has to be the expectation. But like to say like they need 13 points
Nashville, LA.
right when you need if you need 13 points and you're playing Dallas, Nashville, Colorado, Winnipeg, Carolina, and Toronto all in the 1 month. 13 points might be a little bit of a stretch, just given how difficult that schedule is.
Yeah, it is a difficult start, but it does get easier as we look here into November and especially later November. So that's really when it's going to be time to bank those points. All right, so we have an over-under here from Gaby. Over-under, Shane, 47 points this season. What you taking? Alternatively, though, what would you set the over-under at here? So, Gaby, I don't know if this is what you were thinking, because when I went to go do some quick research on this question, I was curious about two things, just to kind of get a sense of 47 points and kind of how reasonable that is. I wanted to know how many points Matty Beniers got in his rookie year, just for reference. And I wanted to know how many points he got last year. In his rookie year, he had 57. Last year, he had 37. 47 is right in between those two. So I don't know if you picked it for that reason. If you did, I kind of like that. But over under 47 points for Shane. I mean, we were just talking about him earlier. I'm feeling very bullish on Shane Wright's production this year. I'm taking the over personally.
I'm going to compare him to the guy who was drafted one spot ahead of him, RJ, in his draft, Logan Cooley. Logan Cooley played 82-game season last year. He had 44 points. I feel like Shane, given that he has more professional experience, he has a coach that knows him and is willing to trust him. And hey, if Shane is the guy who's producing, I fully expect Dan Bylsma to go with whoever's producing. But if Shane is that guy, he'll be the guy. I think 47 points is honestly, it's pretty on the money. Like that feels right around where it should be. I don't know. It's really tough. Like if it was 44, Logan Cooley, I would say over. If it was 50, I would be like, it might be on a little bit of the high end. 47 feels like right on the money. I'll say over because Shane has looked that good. And because, like I said earlier, I'm starting to believe because of his physical tools, because of his experience playing against older competition at the AHL level and going on long playoff runs at the AHL level where he's had to learn what it takes to really power through certain situations and play a certain style of hockey. I'll take the over, but I don't expect him to necessarily blow that number out of the water.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's
like Matty
over.
Yeah, Matty got to 57, but like he was given a lot of opportunities that I don't know Shane is going to get this year because the roster's a little deeper.
And everything went right for him bounce wise. It felt like, you know, he was just on a heater, the level I don't think we'll necessarily see Shane be on like all year. So yeah, I think for those reasons, it won't be a ton over, but I'm still taking the over. I feel optimistic about his production this year. And so I'll roll with that.
Yeah.
Next question here from Olivia. And I love these explainer type questions, but Olivia asks, when teams practice or spend time working on special teams, do they practice transitions as well? We've seen the Kraken over preseason move to a quick transition on ice style. How do they set themselves up for that in practice, like with line changes or with the power play or penalty kill? So the very short answer is yes. They do practice those transitions as well. And you'll see that with some power play drills too. Sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't. But when they're working on the power play, often if the puck is cleared, they will have another puck there ready. The defense will go back and get it, and they'll practice those zone entries. They'll practice those power play breakouts, and then they'll get back into the zone, and then they'll run whatever plays that they run. So that is something that they will practice pretty regularly in practices. You'll even sometimes see it in morning skates where they'll work on it before a game if they feel like that's an area that they need to work on. And then as for the quick transition style, I'll let you kind of handle this, Dylan. How do they work on that in practice, and even dealing with things like line changes or just that quick movement up the ice?
Well, we've seen them work on that in practice. Like, to be honest, we have seen drills in which there has been a push to clear the defensive zone, go off on a line change, new line comes on, and their job is to now go out on the forecheck, and like they're working, things in that way. So yes, the short answer and the quick answer, because we're an hour 10 into the podcast already, is that they do run these drills. Like that is something that they do work on. Yes.
All right. So we have 6 questions left as we're at the hour 10 mark here. So we'll try and do a little bit more rapid fire because these next 3 also, they are more future looking questions. And I mean, ahead of October, ahead of even November, right? This one from Alvi: what trades do you expect at the deadline? Any specific positions you want addressed by deadline time? That's going to depend entirely on where the Kraken are in the standings and how they've been playing. And they're going to look at it then. And it doesn't really make a ton of sense for us to try and predict now, because if they're near the bottom of the standings, they're going to be sellers. If they're near the top of the standings, they might even be buyers. And so it's all going to depend on the results there. This one,
I wouldn't
Paul,
expect anything massive either way, though.
Yes, it's not going to be massive either way. It's going to be the things that just logically make sense. If they're near the bubble, they might stand pat. If they're low in the standings, they're going to trade away the guys who have expiring contracts.
Yeah,
because that's what teams in that position do. If they're near the top, they're going to add whatever need that they are missing.
Whatever they could afford to add based on the cap situation. Because let's be real, like that even if you move a Tanev or whatever, you're not going to have that much space come deadline time, realistically. So,
right, and even you look at the season where they did make the playoffs and went on a bit of a run. They didn't add anything at the deadline. Right? Francis is not the aggressive type of GM. Not his style. There. Yeah. So, question from Paul: next priority for a contract? Daccord, Borgen, Evans, Cartier. Imagine Joey waits on Swayman. This is before the Swayman extension was there. But even then, it's going to wait longer than that. Borgen is probably too expensive and likely a trade deadline casualty. Riker is going to get more expensive as the year goes on, and Karts will likely be the easiest to extend. So I guess looking at the next guys who are up for contract extensions, kind of who's the next priority, I think with all of them, really, you want to let this season play out and see what they're going to do. I think Larson was one that, you kind of needed to maybe make a decision on. They made their call. Will Borgen, you're going to wait to see where you are at the deadline. And I don't think even then you can afford to extend him.
Yeah.
I really would be surprised to see that happen. Joey Daccord, you really got to see how this year plays out. Was last year a one-off or not? And also how Phil Grubauer does. Maybe Riker Evans, I guess, if you kind of had to prioritize one, just because he could get more expensive later. But I just think there's no rush to get it done, because as we talked about earlier in the podcast, right? He's not going to have as big a role this year. It's not like you're going to break the bank for him anyway.
And he's not.
You can wait on all these guys,
right? And you're not going to have a role for Riker Evans next year, because the top 4 that's keeping him from playing now are all under contract for next season too. So unless you move out like a Jamie Alexiak in the last year of his deal over the next offseason, specifically to make room for Riker Evans, why not just give him some sort of bridge deal? He's an RFA, and wait for there naturally to be a spot in your top 4 to open up for him. Cartier, unless he goes out and explodes for 25 goals or something this year, it's going to be a very reasonable, kind of second contract, so to speak, for a guy who was undrafted and has played well, but he's a 4th liner, right? It's an easy contract to get done with Tye Cartier. The priority would be Joey, just because it's, if he does play well, you're having to, whether he plays well or not, you're having to maneuver the most for whatever his next contract is, right? Just because of the Grubauer contracted situation. But to be honest, I really don't feel like there's any of these that are nearly as important as, figuring out what you were doing with Matty long term and what his next contract was this offseason.
Yeah, you've really addressed all of the major things that need to happen with all the top players, right? It's just things around the edges now, and that you can afford to wait on. So Really nobody, I guess, is the next big priority until next offseason. This one from Seattle Kraken GM. What do the Kraken lines and D pairings look like next season in 25-26, with Gord, Turbo, and Borgie likely gone, and squids like Goyette, Newman, Furcus, and Nelson pushing for Coachella? I think this is a better type of question for an armchair GM stream where we have time to really look
Mhm.
at it in depth. And because I just don't think in the time constraints we have that, we could give like a satisfactory answer looking at all the different elements of it. I mean, yeah, you assume, Gord, Tanev, Borgen likely gone. I've said in the past on podcasts, I think Ottavainen slides right in there as the Will Borgen replacement. At least he'll have the opportunity to. So that's the fix on D. You'll need to go with someone cheap.
Mhm.
And then, you look at Gord and Tanev, like right now, those are fourth line guys. And so
Right.
just take your pick of whoever impresses in camp,
Yeah.
next year, and you just slot them in on the fourth line and see what they can do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and kind of answers the own question in the sense that, look, Ryan Winterton was really pushing for a role this year. Probably gets one next year because there's actual spots available. Like there's just no spots available up front this year. So some of those guys, a Ben Myers, who has a good camp, a good preseason, probably makes a team in most situations because there's some fourth line spots available. Next year there'll be fourth line spots available, but it's really only fourth line spots. Like there's nothing else available. There's a third pairing defensive spot open. There's potentially a goalie role open depending on the Joey Decord thing, and then otherwise you're talking about, yes, at most 3 fourth line roles, but realistically 2. So it's not going to look that different next year unless the team is really bad this year and they fire Ron Francis and the whole thing gets blown up. But there's no way to even like begin that discussion. Basically, this team is going to look the same for the next 2 seasons. After that, then things start changing. But this year and next year, probably should expect mostly the same group.
Yeah, I would think so. And again, it's if they underachieve and it's another GM, all bets are off. But as for now, it's going to look pretty similar. So we talked about some of those guys who are in Coachella Valley right now. And so we do have a question. We'll take a little detour down to Coachella Valley. This one from Commodore Schmidlap. After 2 straight trips to the Calder Cup final, is this the year the Firebirds finally make it over the hump and win the Calder Cup? Which Kraken draft pick do you think will make the biggest impact in Coachella Valley this season? So I know you're looking uncomfortable because it is an uncomfortable answer here. I think might have to kind of set expectations the opposite direction with this team getting younger and just not having the same vets they had last year.
Right. They have consciously made the switch from, AHL team that needs to establish itself in the market and AHL team that is going to be comprised of AHL veterans that we can afford to compile together and to establish a brand and culture and all of that kind of stuff, to we're now an AHL team of 20-year-olds that this organization has drafted that we are having to mold into professional hockey players. That was really not the case these last 2 seasons. That is the case now. I think the expectation should be that they're not going to make the Calder Cup final, right? Like that expectation needs to kind of go. And then on top of all of that, like just the fact that like the players are going to be a little bit worse and they're going to be figuring out their footing at the next level as they're all taking this step, all of that kind of stuff. You really only have like 4 or 5 veterans that are going to be there to help shepherd them through that process. You don't have an NHL goaltender in net anymore. Right? Like that's the by far and away the big one. You went from Joey Decord for a season to Chris Drieger for a season, having, unbelievable top 3 probably in all of the AHL level goaltending, to now you're going to have good goaltending, right? Seska can provide good goaltending. Nicholas Coco looks like he was for real through camp. I'm really excited for him to get in there. But it is not going to be at the level of Chris Drieger last year and Joey year 1, where you were able to get away with just about any mistake because you had somebody back there who could backstop you through it. That will no longer be the case. And guess what? You also have a roster that's going to be making more mistakes than the rosters previously did. So I think the expectation is probably not even, Western Conference Finals anymore. I think is this a playoff team?
Yeah, and I think playoffs are a reasonable expectation, kind of given the group they have and Also how many teams, make it. I think it's reasonable. But beyond that, I think we kind of have to lower the expectations, which is normal. I know it's weird to think about it if you're a fan of the Firebirds and these are the 2 seasons that you've seen, right? Most AHL teams, and I know you've also seen like Hershey and Milwaukee in the finals or the conference finals back to back. Most AHL teams are not perennial contenders like that. What we see with Hershey is quite rare, and more often there's kind of a cycle, right, that you go through. If you get the high end prospects, you kind of replenish and all that stuff. So I think the Firebirds are kind of going to go into that cycle a little bit more, but they should still be competitive.
Yeah. As for Kraken draft picks that should show up, I mean, the expectation should be that Ryan Winterton should become a leader on the Firebirds. He's been there before. He looked good last year. He's kind of growing into a spot. I think that's the big one there. The defensemen are going to take a little while, right? Like, don't expect Ty Nelson to go out there and be like super legit, just because defensemen just take time. I think another one would be Jan Newman. Not just because he had the little bit of time last year in Coachella Valley, but also just because he's that good. Like he is just legit good. If the only thing holding you back is skating, and that's really more of a question at the NHL level, I think Yanni Newman's going to be able to get stuff done there.
Yeah, Newman is the one that I'm looking for to, if he can really bust through, if he can work on the skating, that shot is already, I feel like, almost top of the NHL level, right? And the size and everything too, he can work with. So somebody is going to pop. I feel like one of these first year players, who knows, it can even be a Jagger Firkus if he just seamlessly translates and he's fine. You never know. So yeah, somebody is going to pop and play really well, but that's the fun, is seeing who it's going to be. So we have 2 questions left that are not really Kraken related questions. Well, one kind of is, but more on the fun side here. 2 questions to close it off. We'll start with this one. This one from Chuck. If a goalie commits a minor penalty, tripping, say, another player serves it for him in the penalty box. What about if the goalie gets into a fight or is assessed a major penalty? Does another player again serve the penalty for him, or is he just kicked out, or does the other goalie have to come in temporarily? So this is a fun question. I like this question because, well, first of all, goalie fights are rare. It's been a while since we've seen one. The last one happened February 1st, 2020. So we've not seen a goalie fight since COVID. So it's been a little while. But this fight also gives the answer to that question. And so, in short, usually, I think almost always, when there's a goalie fight, they will give the goalies a misconduct penalty that basically ensures that they will not play for the remainder of the game. And so the backup has to come in and play the rest of it. And you saw that in this last fight. It was Cam Talbot versus Mike Smith. Heck of a game, Battle of Alberta. And this happened with about 40 seconds to go in the second period. You had the goalie fight. And if you look at the penalty sheet, so they each get 5 for fighting, of course. They also get a 10-minute misconduct, but then they additionally get each penalties for goalie interference, which I didn't realize they did this. So you get 2 minutes for goalie interference, which, yeah, I guess you did interfere with the other goalie. So you get 2 minutes for goalie interference. Talbot also gets 4 minutes for roughing. So 2 minutes each for roughing. And then with all those penalty minutes added up to those guys, it basically became the rest of the game. Like that was the amount of penalty minutes that were left in the game. And so they weren't really able to come back. So the backups had to come in and play for them. And so you saw Mikko Koskinen and Cam Talbot, and David Riddick, play the rest of the game.
Didn't they add a rule that, like, because obviously, like, a goalie can't play the puck past center, but didn't they add a rule fairly recently that was like goalies cannot, like, if goalies engage in a fight, like you leave your crease and you go all the way down to the other zone, it's like automatic ejection. Like if something actually happens, because they wanted because they wanted to discourage this. Like I thought there was something that if you leave your crease and you go all the way down there to engage the other goalie, we're just kicking you out.
Yeah, I think let's see here. What's the official? Trying to see if I can find it quickly, because I know it's always just they give them, whether it's a game misconduct or a 10 minutes misconduct, basically enough that it makes sure that ensures that they don't play. But I don't know if it's been
right. And I feel like that's where like the goalie interference and stuff comes in, because I don't remember that for like going back to goalies that would fight more regular. Yeah, I don't ever remember the goalie interference thing.
Yeah. And yeah, I know it looks like they have like about a year ago or so decided that yeah, automatic ejection across the center red line for a fight for a goalie. Yeah, so there it
Yeah.
is. So yeah, it's an automatic ejection, which means then the other goalie has to suit up and play the remainder of the game.
Yep.
All right. So final question, Dylan. I think I saved the silliest for last.
Okay.
Which giant bobblehead is your favorite, and what would be your giant bobblehead game day pose? So first things first, which one is your favorite of those giant bobbleheads that they have?
I mean, I'm trying to pull them up again so I can see them. The McCann one's pretty good. Like I do like the McCann one. The Vince Dunn one's also pretty good. It's I don't know, it's tough. I don't know. Like there's the Ebbs one, whatever, but I feel like the Canner one where he's got like the fish and everything. Like that one feels the best.
Yeah, I think I'll have to go with McCann because of the fish sheet. I would go with Eberle because I like that it's from a specific moment, that it's
Mhm.
from his hat trick. They've got the 3 pucks there. I like that he's doing the celebration that he did. That's set up to win, except that I don't like that he's wearing a hat instead of
A
his
helmet?
helmet.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, okay, it's in the moment, right? And then the hat kind of like ruins the immersion of it. The hat that says pitch book on the side of it, so you throw the sponsor in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what prevents it from being the best. So I guess I'll have to go with McCann.
Yeah, I
Dylan.
think the McCann one. Yeah, as for what I would want mine to be, I want to be all wound up, ready to take a slapper. Like that's
Okay.
got to be it.
Mid wind up,
Yep,
right?
yep,
the
yep.
puck down
Sticks
there.
up high, pucks there, ready to go. That's what it's got to be.
Okay, so for me, I guess sticking with the Eberle type thing, I would want it to be a goal celebration from a big goal that I'd scored. I would want it to be tied to a moment of something that I had done. So that's what I'd want it to look like.
I would pick for you. Like if I was to pick for you, it
Yeah.
would be you juggling a puck though, because that's what I think of with
Oh,
you.
yeah. You know what? Okay, that is a better idea.
I would have some way of having like a puck up above your stick, and you're like looking at it, and you're doing the juggle.
Yeah, that's better. You know, I would let you pick what it. Actually, that's very dangerous. No. I would let you advise me.
Yes. Did not say what you were wearing while you were juggling this puck, RJ.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd pick out something great.
Yes.
So yeah, I wouldn't give you full control, although it'd be funny if I did. So maybe for everyone's enjoyment, I would.
But I think that would also be something like we've never really seen bobbleheads like do something like that before. Like I would like as basic as the slap shot is, it's still not something I think of when I think of bobblehead poses. Right? So
No,
many
it's
of them
usually
are
pretty
very basic. So I just think incorporating something a little bit different than that is the way to go.
Which I guess you do want the head more or less vertical or up and down so it can kind of bobble versus on the slap shot there's kind of the side, but you can make that work.
You can make it work. There's got to be. In the history of the NHL, I have not researched this, but I would be willing to bet money that there is a bobblehead out there that somebody has done that is somebody taking a slap shot.
Probably. That seems like an idea someone would have had before. All right, so I know we're like way over on time here, but I do have one more side question with this because I'm looking right now in my office at the John Forsland talking bobblehead.
Yeah.
If you had a talking bobblehead, what would it say?
I mean, there's so many things. I mean,
so
is
many
it just
things
what
that you
is it?
say, Dylan?
Well, I know, but is it just one line? Like, is it one line repeated? Is it like 4 lines that cycle through? Like...
Well, that's okay because I think the Forsland one has 2 that it goes through. So it's the hey, what do you say? And it's that's cracking hockey, baby. So I'll give you 2 lines
as they should be. I don't know. I would probably go with like a movie quote of some kind. I don't necessarily know which one yes, McClunky. I don't know what it would be like off the top of my head. There's a lot that you could go with, but I feel like I would save one for like a movie quote, and then I mean, it would be the most me thing to just kind of wing the second one on day. Like
that's true. You would just off the top of your head.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
All right, I mean the 2 quotes that I have from now I can't use one of on your contacts. I keep quotes from you. But here's what: if I ever have a son, I'm going to name him Nepotism.
Yeah. There you go.
That's a good one.
I want a real Nepo baby. It's
Yep.
solid. Just have a bobblehead say that.
And you know what? That's one I would let you pick what mine said.
Yeah.
I would trust you on that one. You full
Okay.
autonomy.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So with that, or here it could say, and that's with that. That'll do it for this week's
Yeah.
deep dive podcast. And just there you go.
I was gonna say, yeah, just make it the podcast intro and outro. That would be really handy, actually.
It would just let the bobblehead do it every time.
Yeah. Maybe just have it.
Labor-saving
Maybe
device.
maybe just have it talk about the burger of the month at Queen Anne Beer Hall, RJ.
Yep. And it just rotates through. We got 12 of them.
Yep.
You know?
Just all of them. But definitely go check out that new burger of the month, everybody. And yeah, I mean, honestly, there's gonna be 2 games after the Kraken game tomorrow to watch. Queen Anne Beer Hall. It's such a fantastic place to watch a game. I'm looking forward to there being hockey games that I can go to and going to the beer hall and watching those. I've been there now for college football since I moved up here. I want to be able to go and watch a hockey game. And while I enjoy my big pretzel and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I think everybody should, if you're at CPA, just make the very short walk down the hill and go check it out.
Even other Kraken media members, I will not name names, but they do have a podcast, did stop by Queen Anne Beer Hall before the Weezer concert the other day. And I got a DM saying, what's the best thing to get at the beer hall? And they had a fantastic time. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for all.
Yes, exactly. So thanks to them for sponsoring the podcast. Thanks all for listening. And we will see you all next time after Kraken regular season hockey is back underway.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.